Hi. So once we've got the base here and we've more or less blended up our render into a background a bit better in terms of color and reflections and so on, the next step is to start to work into the textures of the massing, the buildings around it, and the street. So the first thing we're going to work on is the texture on the road, which is a bit flat at the moment. The way that we're going to do this is we're going to find an image that more or less resembles what we want this to look like in terms of texture. And then we're going to combine it with this street. Now, the way you can do this is, again, just simply Googling street pavement, looking through all of the options and finding something that more or less resembles what you want your pavement to look like. Now what I've found is this image. Now what we want to do is, well, just organize these properly. Always leave this at the top so it doesn't get lost in when we have a lot of images down there. And do Ctrl-T. And using Ctrl-T, you can stretch this and warp it to fit more or less the perspective of the screen. Now, make it a bit transparent so that you can see how it's looking and whether it matches what we need. So just make sure just the pavement, all of the pavement in the scene is covered by pavement in this photo. Click Enter. And then what you want to do is mask out everything that's not pavement. So we go back to our material ID, and this is why it's useful to organize your material ID quite well. Because when you do that, you can just select one color that corresponds to material, hide this, and then mask it. So there it is. Now, what you want to do is combine the two images. At the moment, it's just it's not blended at all. So what you might want to do is multiply and then decide what opacity you want it at. Or you can experiment with different blending modes, and depending on the material and the darkness or lightness, it's going to work a bit differently. So for example, I can choose overlay, and then maybe that works a bit better, just to give this street an asphalt texture. And so that's looking a bit better. Now we're going to work on the buildings here, and we're actually going to have to do some really tricky stuff with perspective. So when you're actually rendering into a real scene, you can either have a professionally done photograph, which you match your render to, which is quite expensive to do, or more often than not, you'll just have blocks of volumes like we have here. Choose your view and then try to insert elements from the scene, from the actual environment into the scene. So, for example, if we go to Google Street View, and this is the view, more or less the view that we're working with, you can walk around and pick out elements that are important and then just capture the screen and paste them into your Photoshop file. So I've done this. So that's sitting in another file here. And I'll just copy paste them into the file that we're currently working in. So it's just a lot of images, and it's useful to have them all here So you could just flip them on and off, and we're going to work building by building here. And then anytime that you need something, you just look through one of these to see what fits best. Now, for example, let's start with this part right here. So that's the building here. What we then do is just isolate the little bit that you want, and then just crop it. Now this is a bit tedious, so I'm not going to do this on screen. Just get your lasso and remove everything that you want from it. Anything that you don't want from it. Now what you're going to notice is that it doesn't match up correctly to the perspective. So the way to fix this is, first, you're going to want to align any vertical. So here we can see that there's a corner, a vertical corner. Always want to align those. So that's aligned. And then Control T. Actually, no, you have to select one side of the image first, split right at this corner, and then Control T. Now, instead of just scaling up and down, what we're going to do now is, when you put your cursor over here and then you press Control, you can see that the cursor changes to a white arrow. Now when you move this, you start to change its perspective. Not letting go of the control, you can start to change it in different ways. So match up the sizes correctly. Click Enter, and then do the next half. Okay, so now, actually we've got one little slice left over there, just delete it. And at the moment, don't worry about blending it. Just make sure that it fits correctly in to the scene. And now down here, we've got sort of an issue with these plants, and what you can do is just take an eraser with sort of an irregular brush so that something like this works better. Start blending it in. Maybe a bit more carefully than what I'm doing here. And so that's gotten blended properly. Now, remember that you can, if it's something with an irregular roof line like this, we can then go and remove this little bit from the original image. Like so. Go back to your base. Folder. Select your original image. And then you can just remove this. Again, more carefully than what I'm attempting here. And then just do this. And now make sure all of your bits of buildings are grouped up here. And all of them should have opacity 100% at the moment. So just like a cooking show, we've got this whole thing prepared already here. So I'm just going to put all of these into our current file. And after you laboriously go through each and every building, it might look something like this. And they're all at the moment 100% opaque, and they're not blended very carefully. But just make sure that they more or less are of the same tone. So this was a bit dark. Just going to make it a bit lighter so that it matches the rest of the scene. And what else is that one is a bit dark. So let's do this. And so that's it. Now all of these should go into another folder. Just put them in there. We'll call this buildings. Now once you've done that, you can add a curves modifier that affects only this. And you can also add a blend mode to the entire folder. So it says pass through here, but you're going to want to go for multiply. So now it's just adding details to the lighting in the actual scene. So that's a bit more realistic and well blended. And you can just work into the amount of detail that you want. And again, don't go for something too contrasty right now. Just make sure that it's clear, and we'll add effects a bit later. Okay, so now we've got our massing volumes textured. The next step is going to be adding some people, trees, and just elements that will give the building a bit of the scene a bit of scale. And Okay, so we've got everything kind of organized into folders, which is really useful because otherwise we'd have a super long list of random cutouts at this moment.